So much, Daniel. That was beautiful. So, good morning. Is it really still January? I meant to share this with you earlier in January, but my favorite comic strip, there's a dog and a cat, and they're not facing us. And the dog turns to the cat and says, "What's with these humans and these New Year's resolutions?" And the cat says, "Oh, don't worry about that. That's just their to-do list for the first week." Now, I know that would never happen in this congregation, would it? Our resolutions, our intentions, and our affirmations last us until we make new ones for the next year, right? But what a month we've had in January. I love getting back to the basics. And there's nothing simplistic and basic about our wonderful philosophy. It's foundational and transformational in my mind. But let's just review what we've done. The first week was, does the universe play favorites? And the answer we got was no, that there's this wonderful thing called universal law, where Dr. Holmes says there's a power for good in the universe and we can make use of it. And when we impress upon the law, our life outpictures on how we're thinking. And then the second week, Reverend Carol came and told us, or asked us, how much can we believe? And this was great because we all became born again that week, because she told us the definition of being born again in the metaphysical relationship. And that's turning within to that beautiful divine essence that we are and allow it to bubble through and outpicture in our life. And last week, my beloved Nicole and I talked about our favorite subjects. We talked about love and about law. And Nicole presented this beautiful mirror. You guys remember that still? And threw mud on it, muddied it up as much as she could. But yet the good news about last week was there's this beautiful, special, unique sense of the divine inside of you that no one can ever throw mud on and it will never stick. So all we have to do to clear the mud out is to realize that essence that we are inside. And it's a powerful thing. And now I'm going to talk about my favorite subject, learning to trust the invisible. Because if we believe, as we say, that consciousness is the ground of all being, the physical world has its origins in something that we can't see, feel, touch, or hear. And so we have to rely on it. And you know, the scientific world, they had their heyday from the start of around 1600s, where they could look at the outside world, use the scientific measurement, use the scientific method, and create rules and educate us and give us wonderful things. And they had their run truly until Max Planck came along in 1900 and discovered something called the quantum. That was the start of quantum physics. And to the chagrin of the scientists, when they started looking in depth, they couldn't predict the world. Things would pop in and out of experience, physical experience. It frustrated Einstein so much that he says, this doesn't make sense. God does not roll dice. And since that time, we've had something called the placebo effect, which is sort of like impressing your thought upon the law, and it works, meaning if you think you're going to get well, you do, and that's the placebo effect. But the new physics has taught us that the observer influences the experiment. So the new physics is sort of verifying our metaphysics that we've been talking about for 200 years. And one of the earliest teachers, he was a colleague of Dr. Ernest Holmes, was named Raymond Charles Barker. And he was primarily in the East. He was actually Nicole's great-grandmother was a practitioner under Raymond Charles Barker. But he told this about how powerful we are. It goes like this: think of yourself as a spiritual person and cease thinking of yourself in terms of name, age, bank account, and social position. Know that within you is something that is capable of being greater than you are at this moment. I want to read that sentence again. If you don't remember anything from this talk, remember this sentence. Know that within you is something that is capable of being greater than you are at this moment. Begin to think of yourself in larger terms. There is a divine intelligence, a divine pattern, and a divine immensity in which you are forever immersed in, which is forever in action, in and through you. So we're this great, powerful spiritual being, and the verse that we play in our mind gets played out in our physical world. And what we see in our physical world, we can take as the truth or reality, or we can choose again going forward. It reminds me of a story of three umpires, home plate umpires. They were having a beer in a tavern. And they're all home plate umpires, so they're bravado and flamboyant. And the first one says, there are balls and there are strikes. I call them as I see them. And they said, well, that's okay. And then the second one took a sip of his beer and says, there are balls and there are strikes. I call them as they are. And the third one thought about it for a minute, not to be outdone. He said this, there are balls and there are strikes, and they ain't nothing until I call them. So that's a nice story of bravado, but there's some spiritual truth into it. If we look at a situation in the world, at something that's going on, and saying, oh my God, that person is evil, that person is stupid, and it's always going to go on like this, we've just made one of our primary mistakes. Judge Thomas Troward, who is 25% of what Ernest Holmes teaches, said that's secondary causation. When you're looking at the world of facts, the world of effects, and recreating from what's already happened, instead of going within, choosing from on high, and creating a world that you want for yourself. So if we take this view, if we look at the world of experience, if we look at it with the mystery, if we understand that the divine is in every moment, every experience we have, and we wonder what's really going on beneath the surface, we can start to live a little larger. We don't have to live small. We don't have to go over our same drama and our same instance over and over again. Instead of living with that small piece of the pie, we can make it a larger piece of the pie. Because what we are and how we view things is how we get things done. And I shared with you one gift on how we can use our spiritual principles last week, and that's the gift of our affirmative prayer. But what we want to engage now, we want to engage our heart space. And why do we want to engage our heart space? Because if our heart space is constricted, if it's blocked, if there's all kinds of criticism and judgment there, it's not an open channel. We need it to be an absolutely open vortex for the good to flow through. And the good that flows through doesn't come from something external. It comes from something internal. I know the story that I always hear when people said they went to the Center for Spiritual Living for the first time is when they get there, they felt they had come home. And I think the reason why that's so is that we don't teach that you have to do a certain thing. We teach that you're welcome. We not only teach that you're welcome, that we're all this wonderful divine creation, and we all have truths to share. Whether you're the CEO of Google, or if you're homeless looking for the next meal. I remember our beloved Tom Hodges, our practitioner, who just passed earlier this year. He told a very poignant story of the first time he had been. He said he sat at the back of the church and literally cried throughout the entire service. So we need to take our heart. We need to open our heart. And we need to let the heart inform the mind. And then the mind can use the law, and the law does the heavy lifting. The heart points the way, and the law absolutely does the work. And so how do we open our heart? I want to tell you a story. It's actually a true story. A judge by the name of Lee Shapiro. He was a retired judge. You know, a lot of times judges are called hanging judges. Lee was called the hugging judge because he had an open heart, he was compassionate, and he took it beyond what he did in the courtroom. And so he created this thing called this hugging kit. And there was 30 embroidered hearts with stick 'em on the back. And he'd say, I'll give you a heart for a hug. And he'd place the heart on the chest or the shoulder and give him a hug. And he became known for this, so he was like one of these CNN heroes of the year. So he was like a keynote speaker at several of these conferences. So he was at one conference, and a news reporter was giving him a hard time. He says, well, it's easy to do it in here. These people are nice and gentle, and they wanted to hear you. And Lee goes, well, let's go outside. You go outside, and there's several news crews out there. And Lee does it with one of the photographers, or cameraman. And then and he accepted. But the news reporter says, no, that's way too easy. So he goes up to a meter maid, who he'd never seen before. She accepts the heart, gives him the hug. But the newsman was still not accepting of it. So he says, hold on just a minute. So he gets out in the middle of the street, and this is San Francisco, stops a city bus, and they're notorious about being cranky and crotchety, the bus drivers there. So this 230-pound bus driver gets out and said, what's going on? And Lee goes up to him, I'll give you a heart for a hug. And the bus driver says, what the hell? So the newsman says, okay, I agree, there's something to it. And so Lee was doing that, it was opening his heart. And a lot of times when we're doing things that we think we're loving doing, we tend to stretch out of our comfort zone. So this happened to Lee one day. His friend Nancy, who was a professional clown, could tie all the balloon hats, said, come on, Lee, bring your hearts. We're going to the hospital for the disabled veterans and spread some love. And so he went there, and Lee wasn't a man of medicine, so, being around sick people, he had not done a lot. So they go there, and they start with the staff, the orderlies, and the doctors. And pretty soon they all have hearts on and have their hugs. And then they go to some of the patients. And Lee was a bit trepidated because, like I said, he wasn't a medical man. And some of the quadriplegics and the people, he was a little afraid that and he kept asking Nancy, we're not infringing on their space, are we? And she says, no. And so, but then they came to the final man. His name was Leo. He had a bit of a blank stare on his face. He had a white bib on, and he was drooling on himself. And Lee turns to Nancy and said, he's not going to even know what we're doing. She says, no. Ties her balloon, puts it on Leo's head, and then Lee asks him, could I give you a heart for a hug? And something in his eyes said the answer was yes. And he gave it to him. And Leo squealed with delight. And Lee didn't know what was going on. And he turns around, and everyone in the room is crying. The orderlies, the doctors, the other patients. And they said, that's the first time that Leo has smiled in 23 years. So that's why when we do our work, we don't do it mechanically. We engage our heart. Because to me, that is a literal miracle that he did. And how did he do it? Just by opening his heart by moving his feet, and by being compassionate. So with the gift of prayer and this gift of heart, I want to give you one more gift. That's the gift of forgiveness. And I want you to just take a moment and think about if there's anything in 2018 that you're still holding on to, anything that splattered mud on your beautiful mirror. Because what you have to realize is that if you aren't forgiving, all you're doing is you're throwing toxicity and keeping it in your body. The mirror may have had mud thrown on it externally, but remember what I told you earlier. You're beautiful, you have this wonderful spiritual essence, and there's not a thing on this planet that anyone can do to change that beauty, that love, and that presence that you are. All you have to do is go within, let it bubble up, and be the powerful spiritual being that you are. And I want to give you Raymond Charles Barker's sentence one more time. And it goes like this. Know that within you is something that is capable of being greater than you are at this moment. And with that, open your heart. Forgive whoever you need to because it's not serving you. And go out and live this wonderful life. Thank you.